He thought his home was a safe space. But one quiet night, a CEO stepped into a hallway filled with whispers, sharp, cutting words aimed at his little boy. In the dark, he could only make out a child trembling and the cold tone from the woman he trusted. Something was not right, terribly wrong. And when a black caregiver appeared with the light he didn't know he needed, everything he understood about love, loyalty, and the people closest to him started to fall apart. His life, from the outside looking in, was near perfect before that night. Jonathan Miles, a CEO renowned for his impeccable reputation, had worked through the years to reconstruct a haven of peace for his 8-year-old son, Liam. Since his wife's death, he had done everything humanly possible to establish stability. School routines, quiet weekends, and a silent house where his son could heal. To aid in taming the chaos of running a company and raising a child solo, Jonathan hired Ms. Hattie, a seasoned black caregiver with immediate warmth and a steady heart. She became the grounding force in their home, someone Liam trusted without a second thought. Jonathan thought it was all finally coming together. His new fiancée, Vanessa, was caring, attentive, the sort of woman who knew just what to say when they were out in public. She smiled in the right places, charmed investors, and fit seamlessly into Jonathan's polished world. At least that was his thinking. He never thought that maybe he could be failing to see something that was going on silently, somewhere he didn't always see. Still, little things didn't quite add up. Liam had begun to withdraw into himself, to flinch at sudden noises, to actively avoid Vanessa without explanation. Jonathan believed that it was the pressure of change, a child's fear of losing the last remnants of familiarity. Jonathan didn't think to question anything deeper. But Ms. Hattie noticed. She watched closely, her instincts sharp, sensing a tension that no one else seemed ready to acknowledge. Something unspoken was happening inside that house, something that made her uneasy. And days turned into weeks, the fissures in Jonathan's perfect life widening further and further, hinting at the truth that was sitting in the dark, just waiting to force its way into the light. The changes in Liam didn't stop, they deepened. Some mornings, he woke with dark circles under his eyes, staring at the floor as if afraid to look up. Other days, he clung to Ms. Hattie's arm longer than usual, as though he needed her presence just to steady himself. Jonathan saw these things but convinced himself they were temporary. He believed the transition was simply overwhelming for his son. He didn't yet understand that the real danger wasn't outside. It was already inside their home. Vanessa's behavior became more honed in Jonathan's presence, almost too perfect. She overplayed her concern for Liam when Jonathan was around, smoothing his collar, bending to reach his eye, forcing a smile that never quite reached her own. But the moment Jonathan shifted his focus elsewhere, that warmth disappeared. Liam would tense every time she entered a room, his reaction subtle enough that Jonathan wouldn't catch it, yet sharp enough that Miss Hattie felt it like a warning bell. She had seen this kind of duplicity before. Sweetness for the adults, cruelty for the child. And the more she watched, the more certain she became that Liam's fear wasn't imagined. Something hateful was being whispered in the shadows of that home. Something targeted. Something ugly. The first real sign that came was one afternoon when Miss Hattie was folding the laundry and heard a faint murmur down the hall. She paused, listening. It was Vanessa's voice, cold, clipped. But what froze her was the tone. It was the kind of restrained venom she'd encountered too many times as a black woman navigating white spaces that pretended to be hospitable. She knew that tone, and she knew it carried a deeper meaning. She approached slowly, careful not to be noticed. The words weren't clear, but the hostility was unmistakable. By the time she reached the doorway, Vanessa had already changed her face, her voice softening when she realized someone was near. Liam was silent, staring at the floor, holding his hands tightly together. That night, Miss Hattie debated whether to tell Jonathan. She feared he wouldn't believe her. Men in love rarely want to see the truth. But she also feared what might happen to the boy if she stayed silent. So she began observing more closely. Every look, every moment, every shift in Liam's body language when Vanessa approached. And slowly, the pieces began to form a picture she wished she were wrong about. But Vanessa was resentful of the child, period. Not to mention that she was targeting him for something he could not change. Something he had never chosen, his vulnerability, his trauma, his attachment to Ms. Hattie. Disturbingly, she seemed most hostile when the black caregiver was in the room, as if Liam being attached to her was an offense. The racial undertones grew clearer with each day that passed. Vanessa flinched when Ms. Hattie offered suggestions about Liam's routines. She tightened her jaw whenever the child leaned on the caregiver for comfort. And once, when she didn't know anyone was looking, Vanessa wiped down a chair the caregiver had just left, her face twisting in silent disgust. The air in the house grew thicker with tension invisible to those who didn't want to see it, suffocating to those who did. Liam was withdrawing deeper. Ms. Hattie's suspicion was turning into certainty. And Jonathan? He was standing at the edge of a truth he didn't yet realize was already unraveling behind his back. Something was building, something dark, and none of them knew that everything would come crashing into the open on one night shaped by whispers, shadows, and the light that would finally expose them. The night it all erupted began quietly, too quietly. Jonathan came back much later than usual to a house that was dimly lit, the only light coming from the hallway lamp, its light flickering at the end of the corridor. He expected Liam to be in bed already and Vanessa to be lounging around the living room. Instead, he heard a sound that turned his blood cold. A trembling, choked breath, his son's. He moved toward the sound. Footsteps slow, unsure, the darkness thick around him. Then he heard her voice. Low, harsh, each word sharper than the last. Vanessa wasn't comforting the boy. She was cornering him, and something in her tone cut through him like a blade. Jonathan stood stock still just over the threshold, his mind refusing to grasp what he was hearing. Vanessa's words weren't cruel. They were laced with something he could never have imagined coming from the woman he was about to marry. Blame, disgust, resentment, and, beneath it all, the unmistakable sting of something far uglier. She spoke of Liam's weakness, of how he needed to stop acting like those people who always need saving. The emphasis on those people hit him hard. Liam whimpered. Vanessa stepped closer. Jonathan's heart cracked open. Before he could move, there was a soft beam of light behind him. Ms. Hattie, her face tight, the slight trembling of her hand as she held her phone's flashlight. She had heard everything. The light spilled out into the hall and onto Vanessa's face. And for the first time, Jonathan saw her without the mask. The twisted expression, the contempt, the bitterness aimed at a child who had done nothing but exist. Vanessa turned sharply, startled by the sudden illumination, and in that split second, the truth hung there, undeniable. Jonathan stepped into the doorway, his voice shaking with fury and disbelief. Vanessa froze. Liam stared up at his father with wide, pleading eyes. Everything fell apart: the lies, the acting, the secret cruelty in the flash of that one moment. And with the truth blazing before him now, Jonathan must decide. Protect the fragile illusion he had built, or fight for the child who needed him most. Everything would change with the next words he spoke. In the minutes that followed, the illusion to which Jonathan had clung for months finally and completely dissolved. Vanessa tried to recover, to twist her expression back into innocence, but it was too late. The hatred she'd hidden so carefully was finally out in full light carried by the very woman with whom she tried to belittle with quiet, calculated prejudice. Jonathan told her to leave. His voice was steady, but breaking underneath. No arguments. No second chances. She walked out without looking back, her mask finally useless. For Liam, the moment marked the beginning of healing. With Vanessa gone, the fear slowly loosened its grip on him. He stopped flinching at shadows. He began smiling again, small, fragile smiles that told the truth. He finally felt safe. And through it all, Miss Hattie stayed by his side, her presence a reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply holds a light in the darkness. This shook Jonathan to his core, and for the first time he confronted the reality he had allowed himself to ignore. Racism doesn't always enter a home through loud slurs or visible hatred. Sometimes it just walks in all dressed up and smiling politely, flying under the radar because people willfully choose not to see it. He realized that privilege could render even the well-intentioned blind, that silence is often as dangerous as cruelty. The incident changed him. It made him more aware, more protective, more willing to listen to those who experience injustice long before anyone else notices it. And it made him grateful for the courage of one woman who refused to let a child suffer unseen. But the truth is, it wasn't just their story. It was a reflection of countless moments happening behind closed doors, everyday moments where someone's dignity, safety, or identity is threatened simply because of who they are. So, the question remains, how many more lights must be carried into dark rooms before we will finally choose to see what's been there all along?